Hello everybody, in this video I'm going to go through the design of this quite interesting wine bottle. Apparently it's called the Dilly wine bottle, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, but I came across this in a Facebook group called just SolidWorks Facebook group, and the person posted a picture of the wine bottle and asked how you make the grooves in it. So I didn't see anybody respond with a basic tutorial, so I'll quickly go through it and how you would create it. So the first step is to just Google the bottle and get a good image. An image like this, for example, would be a good blueprint to start. So you can just right click and save this image to your computer. So then in SolidWorks, I've obviously modeled this already, but I'll go through step by step so you understand the process. So you'll start a new sketch on any plane. And then inside this sketch, you will import an image of the wine bottle. So to do that, I'll just show you quickly. Front plane sketch. So go to Tools, and then Sketch Tools, and Sketch Picture. And then you can bring in the image that you saved to your computer of the wine bottle, and you can scale it and whatnot. So once that step is done, you'll have the image of the bottle in SolidWorks, so it's just a flat two-dimensional image. And the first step I'm going to do is a surface revolve. So I'm going to create a new sketch, and here I've outlined the edge of the bottle on half the edge. And it's important for you to note, I'll just quickly go through that step. So I'll sketch on the same plane that the picture is on. And I'm just going to try use mostly straight lines, but then obviously when we have curved points, we can't use a straight line, so we want to use a spline. So with splines, just click once at the start point, and then once at the end point, and right click and hit select to exit the spline options. And then when you click on the spline, you can see these little arrows that appear. So these arrows can be adjusted, not only in terms of angle, but also amplitude. So I'm just going to adjust these arrows to give me the best match with the blueprint. Another point worth mentioning is that I can click these arrows and hit horizontal, or likewise I can hit vertical. And what this means is that the tangency between this spline and this curve is 100% smooth now. So when this surface is revolved, it's going to be a smooth surface with smooth transitions. There's going to be no sharp points. So this technique of drawing a spline with 2 points and then manipulating the spline handles is quite important in the surfacing that's going to come later on. So I'll just exit that sketch and quickly delete it. So as you can see with this sketch, I did that whole process going all the way up the bottle, and then I did a surface revolve. So we've got a three-dimensional flat surface of the whole bottle now. So I'll just quickly state that there is no one perfect way of modeling this bottle because it's an organic shape with advanced surfaces. There's multiple different approaches. I'm just doing a quick approach. I'll explain why it's not 100% perfect and what you would have to do to get it to be a better model. So my approach was to cut out the finger groove sections. So what I did is I hid the surface revolve that I just did, and then I started a new sketch. And what I did here was trace the groove sections where the fingers would sit on the bottle. And then from there, I did that using a split line command. So I'll just quickly show you again how I would do that. So do a sketch on the front plane. I'll draw some splines, manipulate the handles so they match the curvature of the blueprint of the bottle. And I did this essentially the whole way around the bottle, starting up here. I'm not going to do this now because it's going to take too long. I'll just delete that quickly. So once I'm happy with that surface, that sketch, I can go into curves and hit split line. And in here, the split line, it's going to project the curve I just drew, the sketch I just drew, on the three-dimensional surface, and I have that hidden at the moment. I'll just go back and unhide that. So in these processes, you quite often have to hide a step, whether that be part of the model or the image you're working with, just so you have a better view of what you're trying to do. So just going back into the split line feature, there's the sketch that I drew, and I'm projecting that sketch onto the revolved surface of the bottle. So that way when I hit OK, so here I'm just going to hide the image. When I hit OK, we can see that the bottle has been split into multiple different surfaces. So then I can use the command delete face. So delete face will be in the surfacing toolbar. By the way, if you don't have access to this surfacing toolbar, what you want to do is go into Tools and then go into Customize. And then when you go into the Customize, you should see all the ribbon bars become available. So for me, sheet metal, weldment, small tools become available. If I wanted the sheet metal ribbon to stay there, I would just right click it and say Show tab. And now when I exit this, the sheet metal is now available. So if I want to then get rid of it, just go into Customize, Sheet Metal, Hide tab. For some people, the surfaces or render tools may not be visible by default, so you might have to do that step. So here, what I've done now is use the Delete Face tool on the split line that I just did earlier. So the Delete Face tool will be under the Surface toolbar. It will be up here. So I'll just quickly show you how to do this. So I've done my split line, so SolidWorks now recognizes this is its own section. So I'll do delete face and then simply select the areas I want to cut away. And I'm just going to say delete, just delete by itself, because you could do delete and patch, and we'll try patch the area with a new flat surface, but I just want to delete these surfaces. So now we can see I've got this interesting shape that's not quite complete. So the plan in my mind when I was modeling this was to cut away these sections and then resurface the finger grooves. I also couldn't find a back image of the bottle. I couldn't find what it looked like on the back. So essentially I just assumed that the area between the thumb and the index finger wrapped around the bottle. That may not be correct, but it's just what I had to assume. So essentially what I did was I did another split line sketch and projected that onto the back of the bottle. So one point to note here is that when you're doing a split line, by default it will generally project in both directions, forwards and backwards, but I just want it to project in a single direction on the back. So that way it only separates the surface into its own segment on the back, because the front of the bottle we want to remain unchanged. Then I simply use the delete face tool again to get rid of that section. And here we're at a point where we can start doing our own surfacing to create the grooves in the bottle. So I'm just going to, I'm not going to go through every step, but I'll show you how to do one and then we'll go from there. So if I go into sketch, if I hit this arrow, I can select the 3D sketch option. And now I want to use a spline again because I'm going to be drawing curves. I'm not going to be drawing straight lines. And I want to try manipulate the curvature with the spline handles. So with the spline selected, I'm just going to select a point here, which is on the bottle, and a point here. Right click, hit select to exit that. So now that I have this is this section here, this kind of loop, it's going to be the smaller subsection surface that I'm going to create. So what I want to do is select the spline, and we're going to alternate between our isometric views, so our front view, side view, top view. In this case, I'm going to the top view, and I want this to match essentially the cylindrical shape of the bottle. So here you just have to try, think and visualize a bit, and I'm actually going to go back and make the initial blueprint of the bottle visible again. And what I'm doing here is trying to create the boundary of the bottle at this point, essentially. So I'm going to manipulate these spline handles so that this boundary section I'm drawing is as close to the real thing as possible. And in this case, this looks quite good. So I actually don't have a side view of the bottle. If I wanted to be more accurate, I could try to find a side view, but it's quite alright to just model with one view of this bottle. It's not the most complicated shape. So here I'm going to press OK to select that, and I'm just going to hide this sketch because it can get in the way when I'm working. So what I want to do here is I'll actually exit this sketch because it's good to try keep everything as modular as possible. So have one spline per sketch. I'm going to do another three-dimensional sketch because I want to create a surface essentially between this edge to this edge, but I need to give it some guide curve to follow. So if I make the blueprint visible again, we can see that obviously the bottle has kind of like a channel, I guess you could call it, where the finger would sit in. So I'm going to draw a guide curve that we're going to use to create our surface. And you can see here, it's difficult for me to get this to follow the shape of the bottle exactly, only with a single spline. So I'm going to actually right click the spline and click insert spline point, put that in the middle, and that's going to give me some more control over the spline, so I can manipulate it a bit more and get it to match the shape of the bottle a bit better. In general, you want to avoid using spline points because they make obviously the splines more complicated, which then make the surfaces more complicated, which means more things could go wrong. So you want to try keep everything as simple as possible when you're doing this. So there I've drawn my three-dimensional guide curve, and I'm still going to alternate between my isometric views because looking at this from the side, the guide curve essentially should just be on one plane. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but the longer you take with this, the better it will be. So there we go. So I'm going to exit this sketch now. So now I can actually create my first surface. So I'm going to go into the surfacing ribbon, and I'm going to use a lofted surface for this section. To be honest, most of the surfacing options are fairly similar. Lofted surface, boundary surface, they're quite similar, so I could use either of those two. I'll just quickly demonstrate the lofted surface process. So here we have two boxes, with the profiles and guide curves. So the profiles are going to be essentially, imagine if we had a square or any kind of shape essentially, the profiles are going to be opposing edges, and these green points specify the starting point, so we want them to be on the same level, if that makes sense. So here I've set my guide curves, but we can actually see that this curve doesn't meet up with this point exactly. So because I'm doing this quickly, I'm kind of taking shortcuts, and I'm trying to model the whole thing in large sections. But really, if you were taking your time and doing this as close to 100% accuracy as you could be, you would split these up into smaller surfaces as you go along. So I'll explain that more in a bit. So I'm just going to clear this section. An important note with this is that good practice is to right click the box and then use the selection manager, which brings up this little box. And I'm on select group. So what I'm going to do is select this edge, but I also have to select this edge so that we go past our guide curve. And then I'm going to hit OK. I'll just quickly highlight the other areas so you can see, but I've selected those two, and then I'm going to hit OK. And now it's selected both of those as an open group. So I'm going to repeat the process, open up the selection manager, select these two curves, and now we can see we've got a surface. The yellow is the surface preview, a surface forming between our profiles. And here I'm going to put in my guide curves. So one guide curve is going to be the first one we drew. Select that. And then a new guide curve is this bottom one. So we can see this is starting to follow everything, but I actually haven't selected that additional sketch I drew. And we can see that the surface we're getting isn't the exact shape we want. We want more of a kind of like indentation in the bottle here. So if I were to try select this curve now, it's actually not going to work because I've put it in the wrong spot. Because this curve is essentially parallel to our start and end ones, we actually want to put it grouped up with them. Okay, apologies, I was actually having some difficulty getting that surface to build properly, and I realized what my mistake was. Unfortunately, SolidWorks isn't the most powerful CAD modeling software for working with surfaces, so you can make some little mistakes and it won't work. So before I was trying to use sort of this edge over here and this edge over here as the profiles, but the edges to start from. And I found that wasn't working, so what I've done is selected that edge and this bottom edge to create the surface, and then the guide curves, again I'm using the selection manager to select multiple groups of curves if I need to. And selecting it this way does work for me. So there we've created our first surface. And I did this process up the whole bottle, so just delete this because I've already done it. Delete them. So here we have our first surface loft feature, and this could have been done with the boundary surface, which is a similar kind of tool. You can experiment with that in your own time if you wish. So here's the second surface feature we created. So I'll just show you the sketches I did. So I created another three-dimensional sketch between, I guess, the top peaks of the second finger groove. And while I'm doing this, I have the blueprint of the bottle visible. So I can see that this is roughly matching the outline of the bottle. And if I go from the top view, we're like pretty close to matching the cylindrical profile. So you're never going to model this 100% accurate because you're just working off a picture and it's a three-dimensional object. But if you alternate between the views, you can get it reasonably good. So I'll do this and exit that, and then show you the additional sketch. So likewise before, I created a guide curve, which was a spline. In this case, I had to add another spline point, and that guide curve spline again follows the blueprint, the outer perimeter of the bottle. So yeah, quite often you have to hide and re-show the blueprint of the bottle when you're working with surfacing. So then I created the surface loft again. So we can see here my profiles is this bottom edge and this top edge, and then these three purple lines are the guide curves I used. So within surfacing, there's also some more features you can use to roughly alter the quality and the characteristics of the surface. I'm not going to go into that now. It's more of an advanced topic. But I am just quickly going to mention that because I was doing this quick, I was modeling large sections in one go. When you're modeling surfaces, you want to try keep them as small as simple as possible. So for example, if I were doing this more accurate, I would model this surface perhaps only just up to this point where there's like a point of inflection and the gradient of the curve changes, so just around here. Instead, I got lazy and modeled it around here, and then this one from here all the way up to here. But really, these two surfaces should be three surfaces. We should have a thin surface covering this section from around here, going down there, and around there. And to demonstrate why that should be the case, if I turn on these zebra stripes, we can see here that there's a bit of a defect in the surface, and we can also see it if we turn the curvature on. We can see a sharp red point, which means that this area here we don't have a smooth transition, and that's because I've tried to get the surface to do too much when really I should just be modeling smaller surfaces and combining them together. But just for the purpose of this tutorial, this is more than fine. So I went through again and did another surface loft for this finger groove up here, same process as before, and then I did the same for the last step. So the last step, the thumb groove, is actually connected to the index finger groove. So this is a surface that's wrapping around the whole bottle, so it's a bit more complicated. So what I had to do was draw multiple guide curves. So if I re-show the blueprint, this guide curve, I got it to match the profile as best as possible from that perspective. And then these ones on the side, obviously because I don't have a side image, I just have to estimate or guess what the profile would be, what the cross-section at this point might be. And also at this point, I decided to slightly alter the shape of the bottle because I wasn't getting good results perfectly following this image at the moment, and an image could be slightly distorted, so sometimes you just have to use your judgment and know when to make changes. But the process of that was essentially the same, so I still used the surface loft feature, and I selected the top part of the cutout as the first profile, and the lower part of the cutout as the second profile, and then all these purple guide curves. So it's probably easier if I hide this. All these purple guide curves were used to sort of guide the surface shape as we're wrapping around the bottle. So if I didn't have these guide curves, it would be more of a flat surface, and we're not really preserving that kind of indentation for the fingers. And again, this isn't 100% accurate way. If I wanted to do it better, I would essentially break this down into smaller steps. But it can take quite a long time to model surfaces perfectly accurate. So from here, we have the bottle, and it's looking all right. Looking reasonably good. So essentially, we just want to finish it up with perhaps the front cover, or the front label, I should say. So to do the front label, it's quite easy. You just create a sketch on, in this case, the front plane. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually going to hide the bottle. Sorry, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show the blueprint, and actually I will hide the bottle, yes. And here I'm drawing the outline of the label. So keep in mind, this is just a drawing on a two-dimensional surface I'm doing. And then what I'm going to do is use the split line feature, which is under curves, like we used before. And that's going to project the two-dimensional drawing we just drew onto this three-dimensional surface. And then from there, essentially it creates a segmentation of that surface. And I've simply put an appearance on there. So if I copy the appearance of the rest of the bottle, I now have the option to just change this surface face. So essentially what I did here is once I got to this step, I selected appearance, and I added appearance just to this surface face to get this result. Now from here, one of the last steps to do is a surface knit. So we can see before this step, if I look at the surface bodies, we've got multiple surface bodies. So we've got the starting bottle and all the cutouts for the finger grooves. And if I select them all, so if I hold down Control and select them all, and then I go into surfaces, I can hit knit surface. And I'm actually going to hit create solid and merge entities. And what this does is it knits the whole thing together for me, so it creates a single solid body now instead of multiple surfaces. And looking at that from a cross-sectional point of view, we can see that this is a solid body. As I'm going through, I can see that we're cutting into something solid here. But before that step, if I were to do a cross-sectional view, there's nothing solid that we're cutting into. It's just a flat, a kind of surface body with no thickness. So just for visual purposes, that's not necessary, but if you're going to actually do something with this model, like maybe manufacture it, you would need to make it a solid body. The last two steps were simply just some text, some labeling. So again, I did a sketch on the flat plane and then used the split line feature to segment this into new surfaces. And then once I've done that, I can use the appearances on just the individual surfaces. So for example, if I wanted the Dilly logo to be sprayed in a different color, I could drag over this red, drop it on there and select the surface, and there we go. So that's the basic idea of how you would model this quickly in SolidWorks. I'll just show you some renders I did. So these are some renders of the final model. Looks quite good, pretty reasonable. And yeah, to really perfect the quality of this, you would take more steps with it. You would partition these into smaller sections, because the mental process when you're surfacing is quite important. Knowing how to break up different things into smaller manageable sections is very important, and that comes with practice and experience. So this is actually a very good model to practice surfacing on. So I would recommend people just have their own attempts at this. And if you learned something from this video, like and subscribe to the channel, and feel free to leave some comments. I'm giving some feedback, and if you have any other objects you would like me to model or do a quick demonstration or tutorial on, just send me a link to some images and I'll give it a go. Alright, thank you guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.